All right, Tracy, if you're ready, we will get started. Welcome, everyone at home. I'm Rachel Helvering from the State Museum, and we are so glad that you are joining us today. Please do make sure that you are muted. You can do that by kind of pulling your cursor down to the bottom of the screen, and there's should be a mute button. Just make sure it's got a red line through it, just in case. If you have any questions at all, if you have questions with audio or anything like that, you can send us a message in the chat bar. That is also down kind of on the bottom right of my screen, maybe in the bottom middle of yours, but it's a little chat bubble. You can click on that. If any questions you have, please do send those to all panelists. You'll see a couple different options. You send them to all panelists, we can see them. If it's a technical question or a question for our speaker, we can look at them and answer you. We will have a time for him to answer some questions at the end. So as he's talking, send us some, and we'll get to those kind of at the end of the talk. To get us started, though, let me introduce our speaker today. We are thrilled to have Tracey Parks with us. He's a native of Lebanon, Tennessee, where he was the first chairman of the Historical Preservation Committee there. He serves on the advisory board for the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts, has numerous publications, but his latest one is also on Moses Crawford, like the talk today. So we are just thrilled to have him here with us. Help me virtually greet him, and Tracy, you take it away.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm very happy to be with you today. It's a little unusual. I'm normally speaking, I think, in front of a live audience, which is always a nice feature to have, but I'm grateful and thankful that we have this technology. This is what we've been using to get through the court system for since March in many instances, and so I've become a little accustomed to it, although WebEx, which we're using today, is different from what I typically use. I want to, first of all, thank and acknowledge Annabeth Hayes and Dan Pomeroy for asking me to make this presentation. And I want to also thank Rachel and Mamie and Jeff and Joyska, who've all kind of been involved, because the technical aspect of this only goes off if these nice people are sticking with us, because all I can do is tell you what little bit I've been able to learn about this particular cabinet maker and his place in the pantheon of the work that we have here in the state of Tennessee. We're going to talk to you. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today. And when I use the word we, sometimes, oftentimes that's a reference to my best research associate. That's my wife, Kim. And you may see her as we go through this, probably not passing behind me, but in a still photo. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the furniture of Moses Crawford, who Moses Crawford was, how we know Moses Crawford's the maker of this particular group of furniture, and how that furniture is contextualized, I think, in the larger context of Southern furniture in general. I said about this mission a few years ago, but what prompted this talk in particular is the acquisition by the state of Tennessee of a piece that we can attribute to this particular maker, Moses Crawford. And you see there in the script to your left on the screen, you can kind of see a basic description of what this is. It's a desk and bookcase. It's walnut. It has secondary wood of yellow pine, which both of which woods, walnut and yellow pine, are something that you can find still growing in East Tennessee. Certainly were during the time period in which this is built. It's built in what is presently Knox County, but it's built in a time period when Knox was probably still Hawkins County. And it's built by this individual, Moses Crawford, who we describe as the first, or Tennessee's earliest, identified cabinet maker. So that is a very interesting starting point, I guess, in terms of who he was. So let's get to what we know about Moses Crawford. How do we associate him with this group of furniture? I'm showing you right now an image of sort of a truncated image of Moses Crawford's estate inventory in the Knox County wills and estate inventories from 1819. And you see there what's highlighted or underlined in red there is the important thing that tells us what his his vocation was. He has one set of cabinet maker's tools, and he also has carpenter's tools listed below that, some planes, stocks, and a small grindstone, 2 candlesticks, books, and a very interesting description of pieces of dry beech for plane stocks. So not only was he a cabinet maker, but he was making planes out of beech wood for other woodworkers in the vicinity when he died in Knox County in 1819. Now, Moses Crawford has been identified as a cabinet maker since the publication of The Art and Mystery of Tennessee Furniture, which is a book I was able to edit back in 1988. And we included Moses Crawford in our list of artisans. We tried to identify as many cabinet makers as we could in the state of Tennessee, and he's one of the people we identified. But we knew nothing else about him. We met the constraints of trying to identify people, but we didn't know anything about him. Didn't know what his furniture looked like. Didn't know if he built furniture. We just knew he obviously lived in Knox County. He died in 1819. So how does he come to be associated with this group of furniture? And before we get to that, I will say that whatever I try to tell you today, based on what I can remember from research that was ongoing probably about 7 years ago, is in a lengthy article that is available to you in the Journal of Early Southern Decorative Arts. It was published in volume 34, 2013. And if you go to mesda.org, mesda.org, you can read this article in the past journals, or you can read current and recent research. There's some excellent research right now ongoing that will tell you about African-American artisans in the American South. There's a lot to be learned and a lot of interesting things. But this article was the culmination of 2 years of research on the ground and identifying and collecting in field research additional pieces of furniture that we could associate into a group. And we'll talk about that group. And when we first start to identify the group, we're out in places like, you see my wife Kim up there in the top dutifully taking some notes. We're out in a cemetery in what I call good snake weather. It's April of the year, and it's probably a little bit later, a little bit warmer than I like to try to trek into an unkept cemetery. But there we are, literally looking for the title of this talk, looking for Moses Crawford. Where is he? And it turns out he's buried right there in Knox County. And if you are downtown in Knox County and you look to your north, you see a ridge, and that's Webb and Black Oak Ridge, I believe it is, about 4 or 5 miles north of town. And you can see it's a very prominent feature in the skyline. And Moses Crawford is just buried on the south side of that ridge. And if you happen to play golf and we're on Whittle Springs Golf Course, and you hit one too far off the fairway, you might actually hit his tombstone, which is just a little ways off of the fairway there. But you see there in the top corner, we're there in the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts. They had acquired a corner cupboard, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, back in 2008 as one of their first pieces of Tennessee furniture. And that corner cupboard was significant both in terms of its architectural form, but also for the history that came with this corner cupboard. It had a history of being acquired as early as 1849 in Knox County by a group of immigrant Swiss family. They'd come here from near the Lake Geneva region of Switzerland, and they had wound up settling in Knox County. And when they did so, they were purchasing property to live and to begin farming, and ultimately become the largest European ethnic group in Knox County by 1850. So this corner cupboard has this wonderful history, yet the history had not been fully explored to discern or determine whether or not we could discover who the cabinet maker was responsible for building this corner cupboard. We knew early history in Knox County. You'd probably say it's attributed to Knox County, but can we associate someone with this corner cupboard? And in fact, it was part of a larger group. 4 pieces had been identified by the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts in their field research. Now, 2 of those pieces, the corner cupboard I just showed you that is now part of the Mesda collection is on your left. You see that with its arched doors and that scrolled pediment, the carved keystone and the flame finial. That piece, along with the flat top cupboard next to it, were published by us in 1988 as part of the Art and Mystery, in which we identified them based on their history as being likely products of Knox County, but we didn't know a maker to attribute them to. And unfortunately, at that time, there were 2 other pieces that are going to wind up being in this group, the desk and bookcase you see and the chest of drawers to your right there, both of which were in the Mesda files. But when field research is done, and we can all make these mistakes, we do the best we can to identify and classify things based on what knowledge we already have. And in the case of this desk and bookcase and this chest of drawers, they had the desk and bookcase had been recorded in Virginia, and the chest of drawers recorded in Nashville, large distances away from the origin point of the making of these pieces, which is Knox County. So that had a influence on how they're cataloged. And in the case of the chest of drawers, it was cataloged. It was, as you see, recorded in 1982, but the provenance it had with it at the time was it was found out in the county from Nashville about 1930. And in fact, it has yellow pine and poplar as secondary woods. And although poplar is a wood that we see oftentimes as a secondary wood in furniture here in the Middle Tennessee region, we don't see yellow pine, especially in the Nashville Basin. Also, this piece has this, if you'll notice, this sort of scalloping around the edge of the top there below the cove molding. And that scalloping, or an astragal, as I call it, that molding related to furniture in North Carolina. So when it was recorded with the yellow pine, obviously not a product of the Nashville Basin, it wound up getting cataloged as North Carolina. And a similar thing happened with the desk and bookcase, which you see here along with the chest of drawers. When it was first recorded, the family gave the provenance that it had come through their family directly from Maryville in Blount County, and had remained in the family. But despite that history, the museum a day or so later records another highly inlaid piece of furniture, which to the researchers at the time looked more like East Tennessee, and it was assumed that the family had just mistaken or gotten confused as to which desk and bookcase was from Tennessee. So in this event, what turns out to be a piece owned by Barclay McGee, which is the desk and bookcase on your right, actually winds up getting attributed to the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, because of its it looks similar to pieces from that area. Now those mistakes were corrected by Ann McPherson in an article which she wrote for the American Furniture Journal back in the early 90s, I believe it was, in which she used these 2 pieces and included them along with the Mesda corner cupboard and the other corner cupboard, which I just showed you, as part of a group which clearly is demonstrating a look that is similar to furniture that we would expect to be coming out of the Shenandoah Valley. And because of that expectation, that desk and bookcase, as you see here, had been misidentified. So as I began to look at research on the corner cupboard, which you see again here to your left, that's in the Mesda collection, I began to think about, we've got this fantastic history. We know where it was in 1849. I wanted to see if I could actually locate that place on the ground. Could I find that place on the ground? And I thought that might possibly lead me to an idea about who the Cabinetmaker was. But I also needed to be able to look at the whole group, as it were, which was then just about 4 pieces of furniture, and try to intuit where that cabinet maker might have been from. if someone's working in Knox County building this corner cupboard that you see on your left, where might he be from? What influence might have come to bear on him in order to make this particular corner cupboard? It struck me very early on, if you look at the engraving to your right, that the architecture of this piece, and it has these full-length quarter columns going all the way up the side here, and it has this scrolled arch top. It was very familiar to me as close, in at least inspirationally, to this Palladio Londonese's design, which is published in the 1730s, I think, for the first time. And then I got to thinking, you know, Mazda has acknowledged that these pieces do look like products from the Shenandoah Valley. It's been noted that features of this corner cupboard are similar to features on pieces from Frederick County, which is near Winchester, Virginia, near the top of the valley. What other pieces are in that area? And I began to look, and this tall chest here in the middle begins to make sense. And it's from a little bit south of Winchester in Augusta County, Virginia. So I began to think, you know, could our artisan, whoever this is working in Knox County, could he be from this Augusta County area? And began to look at it. And here's, for your benefit here, this is a mid-18th century map that shows Augusta County, the counties that, some of the counties we're going to talk about, Botetourt and Rockbridge, have not been formed at this point, but Augusta is pretty much all of that western portion of Virginia on that upper arrow, as you see. And the lower arrow indicates to you our earliest settlements in what will become Tennessee, and it's where our maker, Moses Crawford, will first show up in the Watauga settlements, just south of the Virginia line in North Carolina. And that's where we're going to pick him up at some point in our story. So, knowing that the furniture is similar to furniture in Knox County, our subject matter, knowing it's familiar to and similar to what's going on in Augusta County and what's going on in Shenandoah Valley, could I find someone in Knox County who's from that area? And as it turns out, Moses Crawford, 1819. Will be living in very close proximity, I think I can show you here in just a minute, to where this corner cupboard that this Swiss family buys in 1849 is made. So, but when we start, all we know is that this corner cupboard has an association with the Andersons and the McCampbell family, who settled and lived in this area near Sharps Ridge and just north of Knoxville in what was then called the Grassy Valley. It had been settled in the late 18th century. John Adair is one of the early settlers. He was an Irishman who came in there. Interestingly enough, he's married to Ellen, who is, her maiden name is Crawford. And they settled in this region, I think about 1787, 1788, and built a station there for their protection, the protection of neighbors. And decades or so later, the Andersons and McCampbells settled there. They come out of Rockbridge County, Virginia, just south of Augusta and part of Augusta before Rockbridge is created. So I began to run back the genealogy. And what we know about the McCampbell-Anderson corner cupboard comes from Beverly Burbage, who was a Knoxville attorney who had bought the piece, as you see there at the bottom of that chart on your left, about 1946 or 47, and he bought it from Louisa Truann Campbell. And the Truanns are the Swiss family who owned this piece from 1849. And she had received it from her father, Auguste Truann, who'd received it from his father, Louis Truann, and who had received it from his father, Jean-Jacques Truann, who had bought it in 1849. Now, in 1849, the Truanns had moved. They take this long journey from Switzerland to the United States, arriving in South Carolina, taking railroads till they get to the plateau of Middle Tennessee, I think in Morgan County, where they stay about a year, and they don't find that satisfactory, and then they move further east into Knox County, at which time they're looking for housing. And what they wind up doing is they wind up buying a farm of nearly 1,000 acres from Robert McCampbell Anderson. And Robert McCampbell Anderson had grown up on the farm that he's selling. It had been his father's farm, William Anderson's farm. And William Anderson, as it turns out, had come to Knox County, Tennessee in 1801 from Rockbridge County, Virginia. So where did William Anderson live when he first came? Well, it turns out William Anderson had bought a house. You see that there in the lower right-hand corner of the illustration there, a log house that he had purchased from a fellow by the name of John Crawford. Again, another Crawford here. So we're starting to see a large collection of the same surname right here, and in this instance along White's Creek. And I remember having this epiphany, as I said at the computer one night. I was just beginning this research, and I had been furnished, Robert Leith, the former director at MESDA, had run across this publication that dealt with the Swiss family immigration in Knox County. And in it was a copy of this picture of this log house, and it described how the Truan family had purchased this house in 1849, along with the contents, and that they purchased it from the family of William Anderson. But it said that it was built by John Crawford. And something struck a chord, and I thought, I think we have a cabinet maker by the name of Crawford. So I went to the Art and Mystery. I looked in the index at the back. Sure enough, we had a Moses Crawford, 1819, same time period, dying that period. So I thought, where did Moses live? Remember, I'm trying to locate that corner cupboard on the ground. It turns out Moses lived along White's Creek in Knox County, Tennessee, the same creek that John Crawford, who built this house you see here, lived upon. And I cannot express to you the rarity of having an image of this house from this image is from about 1870, I believe. But it shows the Truan family out in front of William Anderson's house, the house built probably in the 1780s or early 1790s by John Crawford, and sold to William Anderson in 1801. And they describe it there, as you see. And what's interesting about this description is when Louise is writing her family back in Switzerland in 1859, she describes this as it's a wooden house, not a log house. She says a wooden house, stone chimney. And she mentions here that we have all that we need: the chairs, table, bed, and a buffet, the French word for a cupboard. So there we have her telling us that, in fact, that cupboard is part of the house. And there you see sort of a close-up. And there is a description that's very interesting about this, which I have here somewhere. I wrote down. The two windows above, there are two windows in this house. You see them there to your right, one above the other. The lower light's the common room where my father-in-law, John Jock, sleeps. The one above is my room for my little family where I write you. And the third window is that of my brother-in-law, Louis Truan. And there's a kitchen at the back. So she kind of gives us the outline of this house. And it's not what they would call a cabin. This is a house. These were houses, substantial houses being put up in the late 1780s and 1790s as Knox County is being settled. So what does that tell us? John Crawford. Who's John Crawford? Well, it turns out John Crawford is a Revolutionary War veteran. He himself is from Augusta County, Virginia, and he fights in the Revolution. He's a veteran of the Battle of Kings Mountain. He comes to Knox County at an early date. He's part of the Hawkins and then Knox County militia. He is well thought of. He winds up serving on the first committee to draft a constitution for the state of Tennessee. And he's involved in politics afterwards, moving on to Jackson County. So in 1801, he moves west to Middle Tennessee to Jackson County. He sells this property to William Anderson. We believe the same thing happens in 1801 when he sells to William Anderson. That is, he sells the house and especially the corner cupboard. It stays in the house. And then the Swiss family buys it in 1849, and it remains in their family. Now, something significant happens about 1900. The Truan family moves to Washington County, Tennessee, and that's where Beverly Burbage will purchase it in the 1940s. That's significant because the removal of the cupboard is what saves it, because this house actually burns about 1900, 1901, and it's no longer part of the history. So I have a little bit of a line here that gives you a line on John Crawford. So we're looking for, again, a cabinet maker, and we have Moses Crawford, who's right there on the same creek now as John Crawford, the likely first owner of this corner cupboard. And you see some of the highlight points of John Crawford's life there. He marries in Augusta County, where we think the likely cabinet maker, even if Moses or not, is from. He's in Hawkins County, witnessing deeds in 1789. He's appointed militia captain. He takes a land grant there on White's Creek, 500 acres in 1790. He's already living there, we believe, and is appointed captain, then Constitutional Convention, and he ultimately sells his property in 1801 before he moves to Knox County. So back to Moses. How can we find Moses? Now we've got Moses here. Is he part of, or is he connected in any way to Augusta County? Does that line of the story connect? Well, in fact, it turns out that it will. And here you see his gravesite. I was really excited to find his grave. I was really disappointed to find that his gravestone is probably a 1880s, 1870s gravestone, and did not give me the information I sought, which was his date of birth, which we have to kind of interpret as approximately 1743, based on what the age of his widow, Rachel, in the 1830 census. So we're not absolutely certain about his date of birth, but it's circa 1743. But where do we find him other than here in Knox County? You see there William Anderson, the 997.5 acres that he purchases in 1801 from John Crawford. And you see there in the same militia company, Scott's Militia Company, there's Moses Crawford with his 290 acres. These folks are living in close proximity to each other. And in fact, Moses Crawford is on a portion of the land that John Crawford had owned previously and began selling before he moved into Middle Tennessee. So there's an idea that Moses and John are related, and there's also a Samuel Crawford in the neighborhood. And can Samuel be somehow related to Moses? Can we pull all these facts together and make some sense of them? And I would like you to look at Samuel's. This is Samuel's house, again, no longer standing there in Knox County, but you can see a great similarity to the design of it, one window up in the upper story to what we know was John Crawford's house. We don't have an image of Moses's house, but we do of these other two gentlemen. So if we start looking for Moses Crawford, can we find him? And can we find him where we think he should be from with all these other Crawfords coming out of Augusta County? In fact, we can. In 1764, that early date, when Moses Crawford is sued by a fellow named George Skillen in Augusta County. And Moses never comes to court because they can't get service on it. He can't be served the process. The process comes back gone to Carolina. So he has gone south. He's gone somewhere into North Carolina, we're certain at this time, and we suspect he's headed and will wind up in the Watauga settlements, again, where you see that lower area in the very northeast corner of Tennessee. And in fact, that is an area that is ripe to be discovered, ripe to be settled at the close of the French and Indian War. But all of these settlers coming out of Virginia and North Carolina and other places moving into this area, first of all, they aren't certain whether they're still in Virginia. They aren't certain whether they're still in North Carolina. That's a little bit of a problem for them. They're over the mountains. They're the farthest extent of settlement for our soon-to-be nation at that point, as these colonials are pushing into this area. But they're not pushing into an area that is unoccupied. They're pushing onto Cherokee lands. And here you have a 1730s depiction of the Cherokee emissaries who were brought to London to meet with the rulers there in London. And we're especially going to concentrate a little bit on the younger fellow who's there on the far right in just a minute. So we're going to pick up Moses again in 1775. So 21 years before we become a state, we can find Moses on the ground in the Watauga settlement. And he's on the ground and there at the Treaty of Sycamore Shoals in the spring of 1775. The first shots of the American Revolution have just been fired up at Lexington and Concord. And these people who were settlers into this region are beginning to try to treaty with the Cherokee about purchasing Cherokee lands. And Richard Henderson, a jurist, an attorney out of North Carolina, is the person pushing this. This happens, but it will open up settlement to much of Kentucky and it will open up eventually settlement into our region of Middle Tennessee at Nashville. And that dark colored area there is the Transylvania Purchase, the largest private land purchase ever to occur in the United States, which occurs in the spring of 1775. Now, one of the signatories to that is Attakullakulla, or the Little Carpenter, the fellow we saw on the far right of that 1730s engraving. And another one of the signatories we will see participating in the Transylvania land purchase will be Kunashote, or Standing Turkey, who you see here in a 1762 engraving, as taken from a painting done in London when he was brought over as an emissary of the Cherokee Nation. So those are the two of the Cherokee leaders who we have images of that we can show who participate at that signing. And along that same time, a few days later, other settlers in the region, and in particular Jacob Brown, who's a blacksmith and a trader, who's that's trader Trader, who's working there on Cherokee lands with them, manages to enter into deeds of purchase with them. And the signatories, two of the people who sign on as witnesses, happen to be Moses Crawford and Samuel Crawford, probably brothers. They're at this very threshold of beginning the state of Tennessee, our origins there. There they are, and they are witnesses along with Kunashote and Attakullakulla. I think fascinating story there at that early date. So what do we start to know about Moses? Well, we got him in Augusta County in 1764. We know he leaves for Carolina. He becomes a witness in 1775 to these deeds. He purchases land there in 1776 and then sells. He's on the Nolichucky River in what will now be Greene County, essentially. He sells his farm. He gets caught up in the Revolution in a not too great way in 1778 and 1779. In 1779, or 1777, the North Carolinians leading the colony had passed a confiscation act, and those that were thought to be loyal to the crown were subject to having their possessions confiscated, forfeited to the state, as it were, in this instance, the colony. And Moses is accused by three of his neighbors of being a loyalist, and he's brought in and he's convicted in absentia. He's not present. So a few days later, he comes in and he's agreeable to take the oath of allegiance to North Carolina, and he winds up just kind of skating on through. Maybe a loyalist, a Tory, may not be. We don't really know. He posts a $10,000 bond, which is a significant sum of money, especially for the time period. And that is, he has sureties. 7 neighbors sign on as sureties. And then we see him again on some deeds in the 1780s in what would be now Greene County. And then we kind of lose track of him for just a bit before he pops up buying part of what had been John Crawford's farm in 1801 in Knox County. So let's look at the furniture and see what we can tell about that furniture. Here we start again with the corner cupboard. You see construction details that are part of this group. As I mentioned to you, they have this quarter column that goes all the way up the sides. It's broken here on this corner cupboard, as you see on the right there, because it's in a 2-part cupboard. You see the exposed joinery of that divider between the two drawers there. And if you notice on the corner cupboards, they typically have these 2 drawers, as you see on this corner cupboard that descended in a Marable family. 2 drawers in the center there. This example has the quarter column that runs all the way up the side there, and it's stop fluted, which is an arch there about the height of the drawers. And notice the cornice treatment there, and we'll look at that again on this glazed door example. You see that he pretty much builds the same cornice on all of his furniture. And you see, even though this is a flat or blind paneled example, together with a glazed example, pretty similar. This is a little bit later piece from the Coulter family in Maryville. Again, you see the same kind of ideas here. 2 drawers in the middle, You see two doors at the bottom, OG feet. In this instance, he has replaced the full-length quarter column with a chamfer and just a bevel there on the side. And then you see he's using that astragal, which appears in the cornice here on the lower doors. You can really see the repetition of this design here on the cornice treatments, how similar they are. And this is a signature of his work. The cornice treatment on the piece to the right is the Colford cupboard. It's a little bit later. It's still made up of 5 parts like these earlier cupboards, but just a little bit of difference. And then here you see the quarter columns, how they're done. And then you see the stop fluting, which is that arch. There's the extra fluting in the quarter column that you see on the left there. I know you can't see me as I'm pointing. I don't have a pointer here, so I'm pointing at the screen. It's ineffective, I'm sure. Here you see typical drawer construction. You notice this is the bottom side of the drawer. You see it's upside down here. You see the dovetail construction was very typical. And you see this is yellow pine secondary here, secondary wood, which is the wood that's on the interior of the piece. And it has a walnut front on it. One of the things that we noticed very early on, I saw it in a corner cupboard on nearly the first day we started looking at this group, was that on his right-hand drawers, he puts 2 little marks on the interior pieces of that drawer. And once I saw it on a cupboard, I just made a mental note of it, didn't even make it in my notes. The very next day, I was looking at a corner cupboard that had not been previously recorded, saw the same thing. I thought, well, that's unusual to see it twice. I called some of my friends at the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts and said, could you go into the gallery and please pull out the right-hand drawer for the McCampbell Anderson cupboard and tell me if you see these marks? And they did, and they said, there. So this was a habit that he had. He probably laid out the right-hand and left-hand drawers at the same time. He's just marking the right-hand drawer with these 2 score marks. One of the very early settlers who explored the region early on was Alexander McMillan. He explored this region with James White. His home still stands, and this corner cupboard, which is probably fitted early in the production of this shop, a little earlier than most of the pieces we see, descended in that family. You see here some interesting features. I find it greatly interesting. If you'll see that latch there at the lower bottom, that's actually the type of latch that you would find beneath a tilt-top, perhaps tea table of this time period. But here it appears to be original. It appears to have been used by the cabinet maker. I guess that's what he had available to latch that lower door. And there you see an ad from 1794 from the Knoxville Gazette showing that you could get these H hinges that you see on some of these corner cupboards, these other hardware cabinet making tools, as well as mountings for furniture. They were all available at the stores there in Knox County. And here you see a tall chest, which is also part of the group. This is one of the pieces we were able to add in as an additional piece of this group. And it has this, if you look at the, that's a detail of the quarter column on the left there, you'll see that kind of little molded piece that's in there. It's kind of to act as a stop to that area. That will appear again, and the only other piece it appears on in this group, you see it on that center detail, you can see it at the base of the upper quarter column for Barclay McGee's desk and bookcase. And I'm back to Barclay McGee's desk and bookcase because we want to compare it to the piece that the State Museum just bought. So you see here a number of features with Barclay McGee. You see that full quarter column stop fluting on the side of the bookcase top. And at the bottom, you have a fluted chamfered corner, again with stop fluting. You see the details there to your right. And McGee's desk and bookcase is quite unusual. It has that same cornice treatment that we saw on the corner cupboards, but it's a little unusual in that he has applied panels for the upper bookcase door. That was probably an extra feature, probably something he paid for. McGee was quite wealthy. He probably acquired more land than any other person in the late 18th century along the Little Tennessee River. If you've been to Tellico Plains, you've been on land that Barclay McGee at some time acquired. He lived there on one of the main roads right in Maryville and built a house. You see a conjectural image of it there about 1790. He was the type of business person who would need a desk and bookcase, and the one that we see here descended directly in his family. The family had given the proper provenance for it in the 1980s. And here you see it's very detailed interior, which is fascinating to me. I cannot find a parallel in American furniture which shows this particular, you see some arches, but this particular almost super architectural, very Masonic in my mind, situation here in the middle here where you see the arch, the keystone, these fluted columns that are the fronts, little drawers that slide out, and this two-tiered step back kind of interior. So, and that relates precisely to what you see on the desk and bookcase recently acquired by the State Museum. So the State Museum piece on your right, compare that interior to what we see in the Barclay McGee desk and bookcase. They are the same, but for the McGee has a serpentine feature. But remember, McGee is a very wealthy landowner, and he is putting these extras onto, or commissioning these extras for his desk and bookcase, such as the applied panels for this desk and bookcase. All right, so we start with this mystery about a corner cupboard that has great provenance that dates back to 1849. And we wonder whether we can land it on the ground. And in fact, we can. We can probably place it if you look, if you could see through that right-hand window on the lower story there of this house, I think you could see that corner cupboard. You could see it in 1849 when the Truan family buys it. You could see it in 1801 when William Anderson buys it. And you could see it sometime in the late 1780s or maybe 1790 when it's placed in this house for the first time after Moses Crawford builds it for John Crawford, probably his brother. So that information combined with this history that you've already seen with John Crawford allows us to take a piece that we formerly knew as the McCampbell-Anderson cupboard and be able to reinterpret it based on all this additional evidence that we can bring together. It allows us to attribute it to a specific area, Hawkins or Knox County, a specific date, and it allows us to intuit not only the builder, Moses Crawford, but to be able to say that this particular piece of furniture was made for his kinsman, John Crawford, and to put that in, to fully contextualize it and allow us to further contextualize the remainder of the furniture in this group. It's been a pleasure to speak to you. I'm available for questions if anybody has any, or if I've talked too fast and left you in the dirt here, but I've tried to finish in the time that they've given me, and I have 57 seconds over what they told me.
Perfect job. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is, speaking as somebody who works in the history field, this is all our dream, is to go on this like investigative search for in the history. So it's fantastic. We do have questions. If anybody else has questions that they want to send in, there's a little time, so feel free to submit some in the chat bar if you haven't gotten around to it yet. But our first question for you, impressive historical detective work. What are signs that we can use to identify antique furniture in our own family collections? Are there any reasons?
It's such a broad question. Just to identify antique furniture, I guess you just kind of have to know a little bit about furniture styles to kind of start to place things in context. That's kind of a very first starting point for that, and then maybe find someone that has some expertise. I'm always glad to look at pictures of things. Now, a lot of times people send me things. I got something yesterday, and it's kind of like, that's disappointing to me. It's not that old, but I'll try to guide them towards what age it is and try to give them the context about where it fits on the timeline and where it might be made. And then sometimes I just have to look at stuff when people ask me, I go, I don't know. And sometimes that leads us on a fun investigation, and sometimes it doesn't lead anywhere. You said, detective work about this matter. That was what was so much fun about this research, and there's quite a bit more that we can't get into 40 minutes, but at every turn we seem to be, we just had the best luck on this particular research. And I say we because Kim's right there with me side by side, and she's very good about reevaluating some of the information I'm getting. Did you think about this? Because sometimes I'll throw things out. She'll toss them back in, and sometimes I'll throw them back out. Sometimes I'll say, no, you're right. I need to look at that some more. So it's a good good to have someone with you who can help you along.
Awesome. Second question, what do you think the significance is of there being, a cabinet carpentry settlement of the territory? How common was it to find this craftsman in a community at the time?
Your craftsmen are among your first settlers because you're not building anything without them. I mean, if you really get down to it, the people, your first explorers are coming into these regions, obviously, first of all to explore, but also here in Middle Tennessee, you've got long hunters who are coming in. They're taking game, they're taking that back out. It's a financial situation, but in doing that, they're also reporting back what they find here: fertile lands, places where you could start a family, where you could make a living, where you don't have to purchase this. Where you could go and create a life. But carpenters and then cabinet makers, and it's early. A lot of times in this early time period, carpentry and cabinetry, these same people, I believe Crawford, both Crawford, probably John, certainly Moses, and certainly Samuel. Samuel, one of the other Crawfords here, who's the signatory, he's credited with building the first log house in Knoxville. I didn't mention that till now, but they're carpenters and cabinet makers. And if you really analytically look at these very fine-looking pieces up close, they are not super refined. I think Moses was a left-hander based on the number of pieces I've seen. All of his cabinet doors seem to open from the left, and I think he had astigmatism because he'll sometimes kind of go off of a perfect line on some things. But you have to look at a lot of this furniture to start to kind of get to know the guy, and that's fascinating to me.
It is. Okay, looks like our last one. They said fascinating and beautifully done research. Is there any connection of the almost shell-like detail under the broken pediment piece shown to other details by other makers, and in what regions?
Yeah. Again, if you look back to work that's coming out of the Shenandoah Valley, you start to see some of that, and you can take or push that further back up into the Philadelphia region. But all of these things are being inspired by books that are available, architectural books especially. And if you look at this last image especially, it's very architectural in its presentation. And I think that's why it stayed in this same house. This is actually a large enough cupboard. If you remember, it's in two pieces, very heavy, not easily moved. It's not something you're going to put likely on a wagon in 1801 and take across the mountains into Middle Tennessee. So it stays there in the house. It's basically treated kind of like this would be your kitchen cabinets in the 18th century. Everything that you have, that you're going to eat off of, whatever, is stored in this place. And so this is essentially where all that is. It's almost like it's part of the room. And in fact, in earlier decades, buffets and cupboards were built-ins. It's kind of near the mid to the late 18th century where they become freestanding. So this is kind of an early, kind of a transitional kind of idea here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tracey. This was fantastic. We're thrilled to have you. We will have this up on our YouTube channel along with all of our other Lunch and Learns. So if any of our viewers want to go back and catch any you've missed, or if you want to watch this one again, you can find them all there at the Tennessee State Museum YouTube page. We did link your Mesda article, Mr. Parks' Mesda article, in the chat bar, along with our most recent blog post that was also on Moses Crawford. So if you want to do some more reading, we linked that for you. And then lastly, we have our next Lunch and Learn next month. It's February 10th, and it's with Dr. Kabumi from Fisk University. He'll be talking about historic Black colleges and universities. So join us back in February. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Rachel. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.